This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Lauren Leduc for the first time. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Phantom. I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
We want to let people know that we're going to be on Newsly later tonight. We are a featured podcast. You can see that listed on Newsly icon up there for our audience. If they use coupon code GHOST, they can get a 1 month free premium subscription for that coupon code of GHOST. And we're actually at episode 989 of the podcast today. We're getting closer to episode 1000, and we're tracking that on Apple Podcast. And then we've got your website up, which is laurenleduc.com / embody your inner goddess. And I probably messed it up, but that will be fully clickable. So for those of you, after the podcast is published, even on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and everywhere else, you'll be able to click on that and go right to it. So if people click on that link, they go right to your website and where they can find your book.
Yes. Yeah, it goes right to the book, to the pre-order page, and there's all kinds of freebies they can get if they pre-order and enter their order number in. So that's the best place to go, and it's available all over the place.
That's awesome. So
Mhm.
today we're going to talk about embodying your inner goddess. Now you're an author, yoga teacher, intuitive, and a mama, which we know because we can see your your daughter. But so maybe given your background, I don't know where you want to start first. Because I know you're a yoga teacher, you're a mentor, entrepreneur, and author. So maybe you can
Mhm.
give the audience the background of where you want to start with that, with your.
Sure. Yeah, I think I was one of those people. Uh, you're a very creative person, definitely a very creative person on my end, but in a pretty aimless way for a long time. I grew up dancing and I went to my first college for dance. I transferred colleges for fashion design. I just like crashed and burned from my teens to 20s and tried a lot of different things and just couldn't quite land on like my purpose or dharma. And I had a little voice uh, like in the back of my head for a long time telling me to teach yoga because I'd found it many years earlier as a very like deeply healing tool. I had an eating disorder in my teens and 20s. So I was introduced to yoga through my treatment with that. And once I finally listened at age 29, I did a yoga teacher training program and I started teaching yoga right away. And finally things really like clicked into place with me where I had this outlet for not just my creativity, although that is very much used through like teaching and through planning and entrepreneurship and all of that. Um, but really like to be of service to the world and to like use my sensitivity and all these different skills that hadn't quite like clicked into place before. So for the last 8 years, I've owned a pay what you can yoga studio in Kansas City where I live. And I teach outdoor yoga classes to all kinds of folks. I lead yoga teacher training, and I've trained about 150 yoga teachers at this point. And I had this idea for a book that came up early last year, and like when inspiration strikes, you gotta jump on it. It wasn't the best time of my life, admittedly, to write a book. We're coming out of the pandemic. I had a 1-year-old kid. My husband just had major surgery. There are all these different reasons not to do it, but I did it, and now it's being published pretty soon at the end of November. And it's just really cool to be able to kind of package up all of these experiences and stories and wisdom and give people a really practical tool to love themselves more.
I think it's really important for people to have creative outlets, and yoga in itself is creativity. As a teacher, it's your stamp on yoga. How you're teaching people is like how you've embraced it. And so I think creative people, I talk to lots of creative people, and it's like when you get that flow state and you take something that's in inner and you bring it out. Being a music producer and a musician and keyboardist, I deal with musicians a lot, but I find there's a lot of people don't feel that they can be creative. They feel like, well, it's got to be somebody else. It's got to be somebody, it's got to be, oh, I can't be an author because I'm not Stephen King, or I'm not this person, or I'm not this. Like, they compare themselves to this like an unattainable icon, when I think that you can be authentically yourself. And
Mm.
what every human being has to offer is that authentic self. And we all have something to say. And when you give yourself permission from like getting rid of your limiting beliefs, then you can finally like actualize and find what you're good at, like yoga. And now you're bringing that into the world through the book, and you're talking on the podcast. So like that is how I think people make their own brand. Like you're
Mm.
creating your own vision of what you want, and bringing it out to the world. And I think that's really important. So maybe you can talk about how the inner goddess or the sacred feminine has to has inspired you to go in this path.
Yeah. Growing up in the Midwest, in the US, in like an evangelical Christian community, I really only had one idea of what God was, and it was male, right? And I didn't really question that until later on, like as a teenager. And once I started really expanding my mind and opening myself up to different cultures and people and ways of life, I was really attracted to different goddess cultures, and goddesses within them. And there are goddesses within different religions all over the world, ancient and still practiced. So I was really like intrigued to find myself in the divine in a way that I hadn't before. And as I've studied yoga, I've studied like what masculine and feminine energies even are, and they really are something that are like totally different. Maybe there are some parallels, but they're different from like our cultural idea of what masculinity is and what femininity is. They're not something that just like put males and females into boxes. They're
Hmm.
qualities that live within all of us. There are
Yeah.
feminine qualities and masculine qualities. You could call them lunar qualities and solar qualities, and we need all of them. Some people might balance a little bit further one way or the other, and there might be different aspects of like femininity or feminine energy that people who bleed or who are in feminine bodies might more easily be in touch with just because of hormones and stuff like that. But truly, like what I discovered over time or felt from our culture is that many of the perceived masculine qualities are basically like the foundation of our culture. They have really created, I think, this lifestyle where you have to be like really linear and show up and work the same every single day. Where it's more capitalist, where it's
Hmm.
more colonialist, where it's patriarchal. Not to say that all the masculine
Yeah.
qualities are bad. They're not labeled good or bad, but it's like when taken to an extreme, that's what we end up
Yeah, they
with,
can
right?
be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
they can be
And
very overpowering.
absolutely. So I'm not calling for like, let's stomp all of the masculine qualities down and bring up the feminine. When I think about the rise of the sacred feminine or divine feminine, I think of bringing more balance into what we're doing. So that means embracing sensitive folks more.
Yeah.
That means embracing nature more. That means, yeah, being stewards of the earth, whether rather than rather than overpowering it. It means more partnership, less domination. It means, yeah, being in like going back. I don't want to say going back to what the ancients were doing because we're in modern times and there are certain things that are vastly different.
Yeah.
But
We're
I
a lot
think it
indigenous.
is, yeah, exactly. Like even just being able to have a conversation with
Yeah.
you right now, obviously that's something I'm really grateful for. But being able to draw upon some of this wisdom to find more balance and to be more conscientious stewards of the earth and of our own bodies, I think is really important. And I'm know that I'm ranting right now and maybe have strayed a little from the topic, but like
No, but it's
embracing, yeah, embracing this more like lunar side of myself and the different qualities of like what is feminine has truly been really healing for me. So I'm really happy to sort of package this up in a really like systematic way that anyone can follow to feel more in touch with themselves and more whole.
I think it's real important because like I found a lot of a lot of Eastern culture. I became a Buddhist. I lived in Japan. I practiced like a Japanese form of Buddhism, Nichiren Daishonin, but and also I'm part indigenous in terms of Cherokee and Blackfoot. So part of the thing I understood, even growing up, is like the belief in like Gaia. Like in Gaia is like the planet, and it's more feminine. And a lot of what I'm into is poetry and writing and self-expression as a musician. You tend to be able to find those things that are more feminine in terms of like your vulnerability. Like a lot of men are taught not to be vulnerable. But when you're a singer-songwriter, the core of what you do is you start to go into a lot of femininity in terms of being very vulnerable, where a lot of men are scared to do that and they're not willing to put that out there. And so once you start getting into the creative space, you start to find men who are more willing to not just talk about sports and not talk about something kind of shallow. Not that it's always shallow, but they don't want to go deep. They don't want to get into anything that could scare you. They could they reveal weakness or reveal that kind of vulnerability that a lot artists will do that. And I've always been drawn to that aspect of the arts, that you have to kind of open yourself up to the possibility that somebody might criticize you, but you have to be willing to deal with it and not get mad and get aggressive and get bent out of shape. So I think it's like trying to find that femininity is a large part of my music, is the fact that I found the kind of feminine voice in my music, in my writing. And I kind of, there's a lot of artists like between Bowie and Prince and Freddie Mercury. There's a lot of male artists that were able to find that. Even Mick Jagger. There are people that find that. You find it in the music industry a lot, where we have to draw on that to actually get to where we want to express ourselves.
Yeah, I dig that you're saying all of that, and you just named like all of my favorite artists, maybe except for Mick, but that's okay. But I think what you're saying is like so true, and I hadn't really put it in this context before, but I think growing up in the arts, like I did with theater and music and dance, like really opened me up to, um, yeah, just to more than what I was maybe raised with. Like I was around gay people, for instance, where I wouldn't have been in, or I wouldn't have been around open or out gay people in the church necessarily. So it really opened my
Mhm.
mind to other lifestyles and things like that. Also, like creativity in itself, like we talk about the muse, right? And it's sort of objectified as like a female, but truly it is this more feminine quality of that just like wild creativity. And you do have to be in a more feminine state to receive it, because what that truly requires of us is to be very present in the moment so that we can hear it or see it or feel it when it comes, and let it like really flow through us. And if we're in a more masculine, rigid state where we're very like, this is the way things are supposed to be, we're going to close ourselves off to that like divine experience of connecting with the muse. So I love everything you're saying, and I do agree that music can really open people up to a more like balanced and open experience that they might not feel comfortable in otherwise if they were raised, let's say, masculine, in that like, we express ourselves fully through sports and we're allowed to show our anger and our sadness as long as it pertains to like
Yeah.
this game, and outside of it like we're not allowed
Or
to be in
yeah,
touch with
game.
that. But music begs that of us, right, to like to feel
Yeah.
and to connect.
But theater, and like if you're into theater and music, um, and film, it like you can start to access that, and even the authors can start to access that because then they start creating their characters. If you're, yeah, you create female characters and you're a male author, right? And you got to kind of, well, how am I going to authentically create this character if I don't actually find that feminine in myself, right? Because you have to. If you create once you start to create those characters, you are drawing. And even as a songwriter, you create like feminine stories from a female perspective as a character in your song. You have to kind of put yourself in those shoes. You have to think in a different way. So you become open to like the muse, but also like this flow state. And a lot of artists, when you're in the flow state, you can't think like a classical musician who just reads off the paper, right? Not that they don't have intonation, whatever, but they're reading off of Beethoven. It's written. That's what it is. But if you're a fusion or experimental artist, there are no wrong notes. And this has been talked about by people like Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis. Is they have had examples where they were playing and somebody played something that was unexpected and they didn't consider it to be a wrong note. They say that's an opportunity. So that's where there's a different mindset in the creative mindset that is free thinking. Just because you didn't hit the pre-planned note, you hit something different. The whole group goes and plays off of that. It doesn't stop and actually triggers something new. Which if you're in kind of other state of mind, you've got to stop and say we did it wrong. We got to start from the beginning, and you got to. It's the kind of mindset that says if you're doing a diet and you've missed something in the plan, you got to start all over again. If you're doing exercise plan and you don't do everything exactly right, you got to start all over again. Why can't you just go from where you are, be in the present? And that is less rigidity and more openness, which is tends to be more of a female perspective, to be more willing to not just throw it all out away and try to work with it.
Yeah, I love that parallel to jazz, especially. I live in Kansas City, so big jazz town. But that's truly a yogic perspective too. Part of one of the tenets of yoga in the Yoga Sutras, which is a couple thousand years old, is that you have to practice and then accept the results. So you're totally like present and not in denial of the present moment. So you're talking about these artists who are making a quote unquote mistake and then they riff off of that. That's because they're not going to like deny or push down that happened, right? They're going to accept it. And then like, because they're so practiced, make the most of it because they know their instruments. I love that. Those two parallels too are very much like the masculine and feminine. Like the feminine is kind of the acceptance piece and the masculine is the practice. Like these musicians, they know their instruments really well, and knowing that and practicing, like that's the more masculine part of it. And then like opening up to the moment and the muse and the flow is the feminine. So they have to work together.
Yeah, it's like a real interesting thing because like in that flow state, it's kind of like a dream state. And I've been with musicians and I've been in it myself where it feels like you're in a trance. If somebody asked me, like when I was on stage, what was going on, it's like I probably don't remember because I got lost in the moment. You get so caught up in what you're doing, and you're feeding off the crowd, but it's like it's very experiential. You know, it's like you're feeling it at that moment, and you take it in. And that's like some bands is like every night they play, it's a little different. And it's like, why? You know, because you're feeding off that moment. You're feeding off the energy of the crowd, the energy of the band, the acoustics of the place. It makes you sound different, so you do different things. And you're so open to this muse idea or this concept that you're channeling. And so I think I believe this channeling. I've talked to authors that say they get in the flow state, painters get in the flow state, you know, like actors on stage doing a live play they get in a flow state and they get like, well, this character, somebody says a different line. Well, I'm just going to be that character. I'm going to just riff off of it because I know this character. So even if that's not the right line, I can still approach it like I am this person. So I can be that person. So they can just like, they can have it happen and they can react to it like a method actor. They can just get into it so they are that character and they just believe it. And so I think that is a different state of mind because you have to accept imperfection. And I think a lot of people are not willing to accept mistakes, failures, imperfections. I kind of look at them as happy accidents and don't think like every little step in the way is a rung on the ladder. And you don't look at it as a negative, you look at it as a positive.
Yeah, that's like the school of Bob Ross philosophy right there. I love it. The happy little accidents. So I'd love to go back to what you're talking about, like with the actor who's so into their character that they know how to respond in the moment. To me, that's really speaking to this idea of embodiment, which is kind of a buzzword right now. Um, but it is like being so immersed in the actor's case, in the character that they fully identify with that and they can respond as that and be that in any moment without having to like overthink. So in my book, Embody Your Inner Goddess, the embodiment is really about embodying your highest self. And when I talk about the inner goddess, it's like the feminine aspect of your highest self, or you could say your soul. Um, but when you are so fully, I guess, immersed or enmeshed or entwined with like what you feel is divine, um, there are no mistakes, right? You're this vessel for source. And like, yes, things are going to go like not the way your ego has planned. But it's just a more like whole way to live. It's a more comfortable way to live. It's a more exciting and spontaneous way to live by sincerely just being authentic and accepting that. It doesn't mean you
Mhm.
can't try to be your best because like your highest self would be like your, the most kind, loving, wonderful version of yourself. Um, but it is like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of this like Mark Twain quote where he talks about, if you're telling the truth, you never have to like think about what you told somebody or said. Like you always know. That's
It is what it
horrible
is.
yeah, it's
No,
horrible
but
paraphrasing.
it is kind of like that concept. Like if it's the truth, you don't have to think about it
Mhm.
because it is something. Because if you have to think about it, you're probably making up a story. And if you're making up a story, it's probably not the truth. It's probably something that's a little beyond the truth. And so I think of this idea, I think maybe what you're talking about is that radical wholeness, which I think is, I believe in holistic thinking, you know, because a lot of people look at something and they think it's just, oh, is this one thing is going to do it. But when you look at it, it's like it's mind, heart, body, soul, spirit, right? So if you only do something for your mind, you're not taking care of your body. Then you're not taking care of your heart. You're not taking care of your soul. So if those things are missing, it's probably not going to work because a lot of times it's like you have to embrace like the whole picture. And that's where people get into, like I was into sociology, like microcosm, macrocosm. If your microcosm has a lot of issues, which is like your individual self, how are you going to interact with the macrocosm? It's a two-way street. So if there's something wrong, it's going to keep on building. It's going to be exponential. And it's not going to come out like the way you want it to come out because you're not addressing the core problem, which kind of goes back to like, do you love yourself? Have you addressed your own inner issues? If you don't address those, how is anybody else going to love you if you don't love yourself? How are you going to get to anywhere if you have limiting beliefs and you don't think you can do it? Then you're
Mm,
not going to, get to that dream because you don't believe it. You're self sabotaging everything because you're not taking care of that. So you kind of seems like to me like the whole wholeness is like embracing everything, even like your what you perceive as your flaws, because everybody's individuals are individuals, and everything. I look at like a happy accidents, like that's beautiful. Somebody could say,
mm,
"Well, my voice is not perfect, my writing's not perfect, my singing's not perfect, my movements as a dancer aren't perfect," but it's you, and whatever you
mhm.
do is unique to the world as an individual, and it has its own beauty, and that's what we have to come to realize. It's not arrogance to actually believe in yourself, but some people think it is.
Yeah, I love your thoughts on wholeness. I'll expand a little bit and say to me, Wholeness is not something to attain. It's something that already is. It's who we are already. So like the subtitle of the book is A Guided Journey to Radical Wholeness, but truly, like, and I say it at the very beginning, you're already whole. So it's more about realizing that than it is about like finding that. And as humans,
Hmm.
we have this well of desire within us. Not that I think desire is bad, but I think many of us walk around feeling like there's a hole inside of us. And, you know, a lot of people know that and they take advantage of it. It's how things are sold to us, right? Like if you just buy this one thing, you're going to feel happy. If you just meet this one person, you're going to feel happy. If you just live this lifestyle, you're going to be happy. None of that's true. It's all bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse.
You can.
Okay, thank you. I forgot it was live for a second, but
No, it's all right.
like the truth is that we are already whole. So there's something extremely empowering in the knowledge of that and in the embodiment of that. But a lot of times there has to be like a lot of unearthing and discovery to like embody that conclusion. We can say we're whole, but if we don't feel it, then we're still going to be walking around in this needy way, I think, or in a way that is easily manipulated. Um, so yeah, it can take a lot of like deprogramming, so to speak, to get to the point where you realize your wholeness. And then once you realize it, we're humans. We're going to forget. So it's a matter of like remembering over and over again, in my opinion.
It's like you're always learning. Like I look at it like as an artist, I'm never done, right? I never got to a point where I think I'm perfect, right? Because every day I get better, or every day I learn something new, or every day I try something I don't know how to do, right? So if you live life as like realizing there's not going to be this thing that's going to make, oh, if I get this instrument, it's going to make me the best. It's not about that. It's like learning the new things, regardless of whatever instrument you have. But learning new styles or learning from another human being, another artist, and looking at their perspective and learn how to incorporate it and learning like what to challenge yourself. That is where you realize that I'm not really done, but I'm all constantly evolving. You're constantly go. But some people want to just stay on one thing and then make it perfect. But then if you just stay on that one thing and just perfect that, then you become like it's so niched, so narrow. And a lot of times you really aren't happy. What I found the people who tended to do that, they they say, well, I'm pigeonholed. Well, you kind of pigeonholed yourself. It's like because you chose to just do that, and instead of trying to embrace more expansion. And so I think the society tends to want to make you be very niche oriented. But what you find is like the universe is more expansive and tends to want to have you like embrace a lot of things. And so that's where you start to hit that realization that wow, it can be more expansive. It can be more than just my narrow understanding at this moment. And I think that's where people, that's where sometimes the spirituality and other types of thinking beyond wherever you came from, like if you're Eastern philosophies, indigenous philosophies, different things, looking at human history in oral knowledge is what I love talking on the podcast is like human beings have always learned through oral tradition. And every day that I talk to somebody, I learn something new.
Right.
And so I think that's the whole process of like expanding is like actually listening to other people.
I completely agree. As a teacher, that's my favorite thing to do. So, yes, I teach, in the context of yoga, I teach people how to do postures and, I lead classes. They're not very conversation based, but my very favorite thing is like talking yoga philosophy and teaching that. And you can't just teach that at somebody, it's a conversation. Um, and I think that that's the best way to like apply wisdom to our own lives is to talk with each other and to really like I don't know, just discover how it's even relevant to us. And in that process we discover what connects us all. um, that was a little side note, I think, I think from me, but I love like discovering deeper meanings of things through conversations with people. It's absolutely the best. And I think that God, podcasts are amazing. Especially in a time where a lot of people are really isolated. Like, for instance, I had my daughter in November of 2020. So I spent my whole pregnancy through like the most difficult part of the pandemic. I couldn't go to mom groups. I couldn't do all the things that people can do now when they have babies. So I would listen to podcasts and go on walks. And it expanded me so much in that time, even though I wasn't able to like fully interact with others in the way that I wished I could. So it's such a service, you're providing in having these like deep, beautiful discussions, because I think people long for them, and we can't get them through comments on the internet. We can't
No,
get them
no.
through text. Like, it has to be through this long form exploration with each other.
Well, so many people get like spoon fed the TikTok reel in the short in the social media thing. And that's kind of pre-packaged and it's kind of made to be perfect. And you get the perfect influencer, you get the perfect look, and you get all these things. But what I like about the podcast in a live format, not scripted, is that you get the oral tradition of somebody has this idea and you get to hear it. They have this like service or they have a concept or they got a product or they got some kind of some kind of knowledge to transfer. And when they're talking about it, when you have the give and take, something you say can make them look at what they're doing and find some new roadmaps. Something I say, we go two-way street. People, because you put it out there in the world, you put this concept, you put this conversation, it's a two-way street and you learn more. It's like that jazz thing. Like because somebody puts out a question to you or asks you a different angle, then you look back at what you're doing and say, oh, well, I didn't even think of it that way. And it causes more expansion, more
Mhm.
expansive learning. And your brain is built to keep on learning all the time. So if you keep on going out there and challenging your limiting beliefs by allowing people to ask questions and to say make comments and have a free flow conversation. I think that's what I love about it. I think I've gotten therapy from doing all these podcasts for free. you know,
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that therapy is so effective, right? Yeah, when I'm thinking of this long form communication and, within the context of my work, my book goes through the different chakras. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, or chakras. And there are these different energy centers in the
Mhm.
body, right? And I do intuitive work and I read them for people. But what I see like very, very consistently, especially, I'll be honest, I work with a lot more women. So I'm going to speak within that context, women and femmes, is this like pain, scarring, hurt in this area. And it's what governs our communication. It's what allows us to like be authentic and speak our truths. It allows us to like truly hear other people as well. Um, and there's just so much work to do in us being able to speak our truths without judgment, and vice versa, being able to hear other people's truths with curiosity and open mind, um, without creating more like hurt and damage for them. And it truly is my belief, when this opens up for a lot of these women or femmes in the world, that it's really going to change things. There's so much that needs to be expressed. Uh, there's so much that needs to be like uncaged and unfiltered. And I'm not talking about like speaking without tact or kindness, but just speaking in a really truthful way, right? It means like truly sharing your gifts. You talked about earlier, like embracing yourself, and it doesn't mean that you're cocky. It can just mean that you're confident. Like, that's something that a lot of us are um, programmed not to do through our lives. We need to be humble. We need to keep it inside. We shouldn't express when we're angry. We shouldn't speak our desires to the world. Maybe we don't feel we're deserving of them. But I just see this like, yeah, this reopening up of the oral tradition and these like spaces where women, femmes, people of color, anyone who's felt marginalized can like really speak in a vulnerable and authentic way to be deeply, deeply healing, not only on that microcosmic level, but on the macrocosmic level.
I think accessing your intuition, and then also coming from a female, the kind of divine female or sacred feminine, when society has been kind of top down, you know, males controlling things and making things very rigid. So making these rules where people feel uncomfortable saying something that's vulnerable or saying something that's emotional or saying something that's empathetic. Because if you're empathetic, well, you're weak. If you're emotional, well, you're weak again. And if you, so that those type of conversations where I've kind of been driven to talk to, I started the podcast talking to female singer songwriters because I felt like they weren't being paid attention to. And that was when I first started in 2016. I gave them the floor because there's all kinds of places these male singer songwriters can go to, but I wanted to focus on female singer songwriters because I thought they had a different point of view and they had something to say that wasn't being heard. And I've kind of carried it through to now talking to a lot of people from different areas, but still having a focus on a lot of women coming to my stage, because I feel like there's certain people that kind of elevate this other kind of point of view, which I don't think is helpful in a world that's like global, very diverse, mostly a lot of women, and they're not getting their voices heard, or they're having certain images of women being pushed that aren't really serving for femininity in overall. They're kind of like ideas just to make money. And that's not really getting to the heart or the soul or those kind of things. So that's why I want to have this kind of space. And maybe you can talk about like accessing intuition and the kind of energy and chakras and how that is important, because I don't think those things get heard in Western culture that much.
Sure. I'll speak to it from my perspective. So for me, intuition is accessed through the third eye. So that's the chakra like between the eyebrows at the forehead. And I want to make a distinction. There's also, I think our bodies hold so much knowledge and can pick up on so much. I think this is something like indigenous cultures, for instance, are far more familiar with than we are in Western cultures. So there are different types of information we get. So when I speak to third eye, I'm talking about like access to like our highest self, to like that. To me, it's like a very quiet, always loving, always kind voice inside. That's the inner compass. And that can connect with other people's souls, with other people's energy. We also have like the gut, for instance, and the solar plexus. And for me, that's like very much instinct. So, like, maybe your stomach hurts when you think about something. That's information that's really important for you to know. Um, I've worked with like private yoga students before who almost have no connection whatsoever to what's going on in their body. Like I'll ask, like, when you're feeling stress, where do you feel it? "Well, I don't feel it anywhere." I'm like, it's there.
Yeah, you're just not listening. You're not
It's
listening.
there. Yeah, you're divorced from your body in a way. So by connecting with our bodies, we're able to connect with our energy. We're able to connect with our intuition and instincts and emotions and all these amazing tools that connect us with everyone and everything around us. So for intuition, specifically, there are different ways that we all access it. So it honestly, if you're creative, it's so much easier, I think, to access it because it comes in the form of imagination. It comes in the form of dreams. It comes into the form of like truly being able to like listen to whatever is going on inside without judgment and more curiosity. So some people will access it more through visuals. So like if I'm looking at somebody's chakras, for instance, I might get some visual information, and it doesn't mean that that is what is there. It's just information for me to be able to verbalize like the energy that I'm seeing, if that makes sense. Like if I
Hmm.
see a heart locked in a box or something like that, that's not what's there in their chakra. It's meant for me to interpret.
So
Um,
you interpret.
yeah, then some people might hear um, like more of an audio thing, and it's the same way that you hear like your thoughts, or if you're like thinking of a song, it's the same way you hear that. So it's not something like that's outside of you necessarily, it's inside of you. Some people might feel, so you might feel in your body what someone else is feeling. And some people have what's called claircognizance, which means that they kind of download the information in a way. So it might just be this knowing that you have right away. For some people, it might be stronger in one area or another, but I think for most, like we have a combination of abilities. And it's a matter of practice, like anything else. When I was, I have known I've been an intuitive person for a long time, but I went through like a formal training program to help me manage it better and have
Hmm.
like better tools to use it. And practicing with other people was like the best way to get a lot more confident about my inner voice really quickly, because I was receiving like feedback from them that I wouldn't get if I'm just sitting alone and I have some sort of idea. And I don't know, like, how do you confirm that necessarily? But I do know over the years when I have listened to my intuition, it doesn't mean that it's giving me like an easy road to follow necessarily, but it's given me the right one, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you got to trust yourself. A lot of times, you know, I think a lot of times the intuition as an artist, like, do you listen to like the silence, or do you listen to like sometimes we put ourselves in this place where we don't really get a lot of feedback. We kind of want the quiet. And in the quiet moments, that's when we get these ideas come. And
Mhm.
then when you hear that idea, you're not somebody that says, well, that wasn't what I was planning on paper. You actually receive what comes to you. And even when you're in the room, like when you're vibing with people, there's a lot of nonverbal communication when you're dealing with like in a band. There's a lot of stuff we do. We don't even say anything. We just kind of look at each other and we kind of know. And we don't even have to tell each other. We kind of see it, feel it, hear it. You get the vibe. Like you get a vibe like, well, this guy fits in the group because he kind of gets it. And we don't
Mhm.
really even have to say anything. And this other guy, you got to tell him all the time, is like, well, that doesn't really fit. He's not really picking up the cues. He's not really picking up what's going on. And sometimes like you can be very intuitive with people and you get this group that you fit and you can hear it and there's like a synchronization. And it's hard to understand, but like sometimes there's that kind of connectivity with certain people that it just works. And then some people it's like, well, that's a really bad vibe from this person. It's like, why? And you're like, well, that's what it is. You can try to change it, and you can try it, but sometimes it's like that's what it is. And you can do everything you can, and sometimes you can't change it. So
Mm.
it's like learning how to read things in your body too, like your gut feeling. Like if something's turning your stomach, you ought to listen to that. If something's like making something inside of you hurt, and then you just push it down because you don't want to hear it. It's the same thing as if you're not picking up the vibe. If you're not picking up the internal vibe, then you're not picking up the external vibe.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really great points there, and such great parallels too. This conversation's so fun, by the way, to like bring this into the context of music and creation and all that. Um, there's a part of my book where I talk about a yogic concept called pratyahara. That's one of the 8 limbs of yoga. So it's just as important as like the different poses and stuff that you see yoga people do. But pratyahara means sense withdrawal. It's getting into that quiet space. It's cutting out the noise from the outside world. And it's what you need to do to get into a space for meditation and like connection with the divine. But I talk about like, yeah, creativity and when I've like received these downloads and things like that. And it's never forced. Like I can't, could I sit at a whiteboard and write things down? Like, yeah, or maybe have like a formal brainstorming meeting with people. Yeah, but I might get a lot more out of like taking a shower, honestly, than
Mhm.
anything
Yeah.
else, where like suddenly it's quiet and I'm relaxed. And when I'm relaxed, which is in the feminine, that allows for, those ideas to come through. So I can totally see how that, like a quiet space, would be conducive to the making of music. And that you're asking about like the energy. In my opinion, you don't have to like believe in the chakras to really benefit from them. They're such like a beautiful organizational system for what makes us like human and spirit. Um, but when we're talking about the energy body, we are talking about like this aura around us, the vibration around us. It's comprised of so much of our emotions, of our experiences, of like how much love we're putting out, of how receptive we are, of our boundaries. Um, and like if we're open to it, we can totally feel that from other people and they can feel it from us too. And I think that like, someone who doesn't understand like more empathetic or sensitive people just isn't turned on to that in the way that they could be. I do think everyone is totally capable of it. It might take some self-work to get there though.
Yeah, and people are in different places. Like at some at that moment you're with this person and it doesn't work. It doesn't mean they could never be there. But at that point, it's not working, and so you kind of feel it. And so, yeah, it's like you want to be able to be civil with everybody, but sometimes for your own self preservation, you have to kind of know what works, and in terms of like codependency and different things. People have to get to a point where they know something is either working or it's not working, and it's like at this point of diminishing returns. And maybe they'll eventually get to that place where you have that kind of you're in the same frequency, because I deal with frequencies. I'm a sound designer. I deal with synthesizers that have oscillators and we can make waveforms. And as a musician, I can see what these waveforms do when I go out in the crowd and I play. And certain waveforms will make people very joyous. Certain make them frenetic, like a punk rock show or a grunge show, kind of jumping and doing very frenetic. And some of them like more romantic. They're holding up the candles. So if you do certain frequencies and certain rhythms, you can cause certain behaviors, and you can see it through music immediately. We see it like immediate reception of what we're putting out. We can see the immediate connection, which is different than some other arts, because we're dealing with those frequencies, which are kind of like your heartbeat and your other things are going on in your own aura and the waveforms that you kind of put out as a human through your electric, you're putting out electricity. So we're all putting out waves, brain waves, heart waves, all kind of waves. So when you deal with these waveforms, you can kind of connect. And it sounds kind of weird, and people, well, that's weird. But that's kind of what it is. And being a musician, I believe in it. So it's like, well, you can't touch it. Well, what it is, it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I have my own beliefs kind of based on being, playing with these waveforms. But yeah, I think I can understand what you're talking about. Maybe I don't know the chakra for it, but I think I might have experienced some things in that they're kind of equate what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, like I think a lot of this esoteric knowledge, like it's stuff that just hasn't been proven yet, but it does seem to parallel a lot with science. Like you're talking about the sound, like that's not just you, um, it's not just you like pondering whether or not that's happening, like it's real. And now like the effects of sound have been studied and they use sound waves for like surgery for people and they use sound waves uh, as like a weapon. Like sound is used in so many different ways scientifically that I think like this greater understanding of like vibration and waves and frequency will probably sound a lot less like airy fairy or woo woo. I hate the word woo woo, but like will
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
less
gotcha.
new age over time and more just this is how things are.
Yeah, it makes sense to me because I kind of live it in the waveforms. I can see them on the oscilloscope, and I can, have them on some of my instruments, and I can see what happens when I do it. So if these waveforms are out there, and you don't see them on the oscilloscope, but they're there. There's all kinds of things that my cat can hear frequencies I can't hear.
Mm.
So, she would sometimes say something to me and she's saying it in such a high pitch, I don't know what she said, but she thinks she said something I can hear. And then she doesn't know why I don't respond. So why I can't hear that. But so just because you can't hear it doesn't mean it's there. Right. So that right there is like because you have a faith in the overall kind of universe, there's a lot of things, there's light forms that we can't see, but they're there. There's waveforms out there we can't see, but they're there. So it makes sense that these auras are putting out these things that are affecting us, and it makes sense that we could perceive them.
Mm.
So it's not, it's like, well, it's not, it's not fantasy. It's not kind of, kind of this other, like, oh, these guys are kind of hippies. What are they talking about? I'm a child of the 70s. And so I'm, I'm kind of maybe predisposed to some of that being a kid growing up in that time period, but I just like, there's nothing wrong with having these kind of mystical thinking. There's nothing wrong with it because like, if I think about my, the heritage is like, the Cherokee and the Blackfoot, the spirit animals and all the concepts within indigenous cultures. There's a lot of that that, that you were kind of talking about. That in these cultures they had goddesses. In these cultures they had belief in the earth. Reverence for animals, believing that they had souls, believing that they had power. They weren't just something to be a pet. That you didn't own them. You never owned them. They're equal to you. So that there's the different mindsets out there, but people, might not have had it, and maybe they come to it.
Mm. Yeah, I want to speak to that in like the non-ownership of animals. And I think going back to that mindset or moving forward into that mindset is not expanding it beyond animals to the earth itself. Like we're not here to conquer the earth. We're just living here and we're stewards of it for our time here. And shouldn't that really change the way that we perceive it, the way we treat it, the way that we prioritize longevity? Um, and to me, and you were talking about Gaia at the beginning, like going back to like that kind of reverence for the earth, for its plants, for our animals, for its waters, like that is very much in embracing the sacred feminine. Um, and it's good to see a lot of movement toward that right now. And I personally do wish it was happening at a more quick, a faster rate.
Yeah, we all got to get back to source. We kind of all have to understand this kind of there are universal cosmic truths that are out there. And once you understand the interconnectedness of the planet and the things that we do have effects, and that we're not somehow there's certain mindsets that somehow put human beings outside of the structure of the earth or the structure of the universe, and some said we were on the top without understanding we're a piece of the whole. And the more indigenous cultures understood that we were part of the whole and knew that there's certain things you shouldn't do, and it was kind of known knowledge by the ancients, and some of that but got degraded and like, oh, that's not advanced, that's not industrial, it's not technological, and so people pushed it down. And now we're actually finding in this age with all the global warming, it's like, well, there's some things that they knew you shouldn't do and you did it, and now we're seeing the result. So it's like you kind of got to get back to the basics, regardless of whatever you know monetary or physical thing you get. You kind of have to get back to like, are you happy? Is the
Yeah.
world happy? Is the planet happy? Like, because if it's like you get in a category 6 hurricane, doesn't look like Gaia is happy. If you get things that Gaia is showing you, she's not happy. Because the things you have put out into the world are putting things in there's an imbalance. It's not balanced, and there's a problem. We haven't been good stewards of understanding that. So I think people have to kind of come back to, are the things you're doing giving you inner peace, or are they not? What's the effect of your microcosm on the macrocosm? And it's individual responsibility. And people say, well, it's not my responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility.
Mhm.
So that's where I think that's where when we start to get back to balance, when people start to realize, I think the things you do with yoga will get people more in tune. If they get more in tune, then they're going to be in a better place.
Mm. Yeah, that's how I feel, and that's how I think make peace with my little piece of the whole, right? Is that like I can't solve everything. Um, no one person can do that, but I can take care of my little corner of the world and I can provide a more peaceful inner environment for people through my work and, through being a steward of this practice. Um, and I guess that I can embrace my wholeness by knowing that that's enough for me for this lifetime, unless source asks me to expand beyond
Yeah,
beyond
yeah,
that,
you
right?
never know. Yeah, you never know where you get because like if you're the goddess, you can go to greater
Mm,
points. Like it's like when you're ready. Like as you start to become more confident and more clear on what your path is, the path changes. It has
mhm,
different routes, places to go. And as you start to move in the world and have something to say and a benefit, I think bringing the idea of the sacred feminine and inner goddess out there and talking about chakras and talking about intuitive knowledge, it is like it allows that to be put into the space. If it gets into space, then people think, well, that's okay. Because the more you hear it,
mhm.
then the more, if you don't hear something, you don't know about it, you don't look into it. So I think you're doing a service just to put it out into the world.
I appreciate you saying that, and yeah, I'll circle back kind of to the earlier part of the conversation in that, part of the feminine is allowing like the muse or source or a spirit to flow through you and just like being the best vessel possible for it. And there's something really freeing about that because it isn't all on your shoulders. You're just saying like, hey God, hey goddess, hey source, hey spirit, however you define it, just use me. And I'm here and I'm listening and I'm not going to be held back by by my own self, by my own ego, by self-hatred, by that feeling of emptiness. I'm going to show up and we'll see what happens.
Well, I think you're being the best version of yourself. You're not, limited. You're moving, pushing forward. You've got a book coming out. You've been teaching people. Being a teacher is a big thing. I think it's a very great service to teach. Is something that I think is like of honorable position. And a lot of times people don't do it, but I think it's like something to allow people to understand what and train people. I think is a great service. So I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. I know you're busy, and we see your daughter there with you, and that's just part of life. That's what it is. So we don't, that I think they commend you. You're doing everything. You're a mother. That's part of that's who you are. So I want to thank you again for being on the show. I want to let people know we have laurenleduc.com URL there. You can click on that when we're fully published. You'll be able to check out the book and do the pre-order, right? You can do a pre-order from there.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you for your service too. You're providing a platform for all of these interesting conversations and also, showing up as you and with your own gifts. And it's such a beautiful contribution. I'm so happy that we've had this chance to connect. And yeah, thanks for being cool with my daughter here. We live a very like integrated life. The pandemic kind of changed things for people. It's not like, okay, I go to work and then I take off that hat and then I'm going to go be a mom. Like
You are.
stuff's
You
happening
are.
all at once over
You got a
here.
lot of hats. If we're all parents, a lot of us are parents. A
Mm,
lot of us have a lot of hats, and it's like you try to, hide the hat. It's like no, it's like this is who I am. And I think that's really cool to show people that you can do it. You can still, you can do a podcast with your daughter right there. That is cool. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. That's great. I think that shows you're authentic. That shows you're a mom. Like, that is who you are. So that's awesome. So that's
Thank you.
commended. Thank you again for being on the show, and let everybody know we'll be on all the major platforms. The podcast can be listened to or watched. And you'll have that information tomorrow. We're live on YouTube and Twitch. The Facebook feed had an issue, but we'll be pushing out an update to that. So the Facebook feed for some reason had an issue, but we'll have a new feed for that later tonight. Thank you.